the reason why you are here after the response we got with Sean, and we're getting a little bit deeper on this topic. So now, let's go to the last part of what he said in the video, where he says, you know, this person's life, you know, that person's this person.
Right.
So obviously these are some names here. We'll go through them together. You obviously know who these are.
Right.
Mansur, you know, El Sombati, Matarasso, and then we have some other guys here we'll get to here in a minute. Okay. So, you know, when you look at this, what was the cause of death with
Matarazzo? And like one of my best friends was best friends with him. So one of my best friends, Mel Chansey, was very, very good friends with him.
I've heard nothing but good things about him.
Matarazzo?
Yeah.
Phenomenal guy. Like one of the greatest guys on the,
That's what I've heard.
Like phenomenal personality, like
fun.
Just a phenomenal guy, phenomenal guy. Realistically, I believe that he was like hereditary. Like I think that his father died at a relatively young age of heart issues. Like, can you say like, did the things that he did maybe escalated? Possibly, like possibly. But I mean, I don't think that there was anything like. I think that there's no doubt like some of the choices he made, without a doubt, could have changed the process. But I think he died of cardiac arrest, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it was a hereditary issue.
El Sombati, because Sean put that on you.
Chad's got blood all over his hands, man. I mean, Ronnie Coleman will defend him to the 9th degree, but he was in that bathtub near death in 2001 at the direction of Chad Nichols, who's not a doctor, by the way. There's at least 5 deaths. Don Youngblood, Nasser El Sombati, Dallas McCarver, and a few other people that he's had his relationships with as a bodybuilding coach that are dead and in the ground, and he hadn't gone to one funeral. Don Long, no kidneys.
He hadn't gone to one funeral.
No, not one. These are people he worked with. Didn't go to funerals.
That went on me, right. So here's the thing with Nasser. So Nasser was probably one of my best friends within the industry. So me and him were together a lot. I talked to him probably more than any other bodybuilder ever that I'd worked with. So me and Nasser were very, very close. My relationship with Nasser was very unique because most of my guys I was 100% in control of, 100% in control. But Nasser was a little bit different. So if anybody that knew Nasser, he was a very, very intelligent man. Spoke 7 different languages. Like, he was a very smart human being. And so my role with him was literally more advisory, maybe, I guess you'd say, or friend, like, whatever. And so, literally the shows that I would work with him, I worked with him for, 97 Olympia, 98 Olympia, 99 Arnold. Okay, so those were the main shows that I worked with him in. And I didn't literally take over all of his stuff until the last week. So I would control definitely all of his like final prep stuff. But the rest of the stuff was, at this point, by the time he got there, like, he was big. Like, he was, like, I didn't need to be like, hey, listen, this is the way you need to train, or this is what you need to do. He would, send me pictures and be like, how close am I? Like, that was where the things were. He would ask me like, hey, I'm thinking about adding this in. I'd be like, yeah, that's probably a good idea, or no, you don't need that yet, or those types of things. But there was never like, this is what you do. Right here, this is what you follow, da-da-da-da-da. Now, the thing with Nasser is, like, this is the thing that's interesting about Nasser. So again, like, he literally puts that one on me, right? So, but literally, I didn't train him after 99, and he died 14 years later. Like, I'm not really sure how, like, I'm not even sure how you even go down that road. Like, it's so idiotic. Like, I mean, like, he could have lived 20 more years, and then you're like, yeah, that was still him. Like, yeah.
Mansur, obviously, you never did anything.
Mansur, but it's interesting. I talked to Mansur the year he died, and so he was a very unique individual. He was a super nice guy. He didn't speak really good English, so it was like
tough to speak.
It was tough to communicate with him. And we were talking about some stuff, and then we were talking about a certain thing that he was using. And then he mentioned it was a cortisol blocker that he was talking about. And then he mentioned another cortisol blocker. It was the weirdest conversation. I'll never forget it. And I'm like, I said, you realize those are the same thing? And he's like, no, they're different. And I'm like, no. I said, this is the American version. This is the European version. And
so he was double dipping.
Yeah, and so he was double dipping on those. Now, those are notorious for eating up like your stomach. They're really hard on the stomach, like even at a moderate to low dose. And he was doing a humongous dose of it. Now, I'm not saying that's what had anything to do with it, but the conversation that I had was very, like, so weird, because I remember going up to Kim and being like, man, these guys don't even know what they're doing. Like, they were talking about this and, like, the same thing. Like, what in the hell is going on? And then literally we get home from the Arnold that year, and then he had died on the plane, or at least like
after your call.
Well, no, I just literally talked to him, and it was a very brief, like it was at the show, and we were talking about stuff, and
I mean,
like
his
just
physique
BS
makes no sense, though. I mean,
and he was actually commenting on Kim's physique, like he was like, being like, I'd never seen a female's quads that lean, da da da, and we're like, you got to be kidding me, like look at your quads.
Okay, let's just go to Dallas.
Dallas, for sure.
So obviously that's the controversial one.
That's
that
the
you hear about
controversial
what
one,
happened
for sure.
there. So
for sure,
there's the dialogue between Dallas and Sean when they go backstage. You know that whole thing. I've been throwing up for 3.
He was working with Dallas McCarver. When he started working with Dallas McCarver, I said Dallas has 6 months to live. He died 8 months later. So I have a reason to be pissed.
And what's your relationship with Dallas? Because that's the biggest one he puts on you.
The biggest one, right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing with Dallas. So I worked with Dallas for 3 months. That was it. I only worked with him for one show. I met with him in November at Nationals, and I prepped him for the Arnold. I became very close with Dallas during that time. And, you know, Dallas was one of these guys that was just a likable, like there's no way you couldn't like Dallas. Like he was probably one of the most genuine, nicest people I had ever met in my life. He was super honest about everything. Like there was so many things that so I never literally second guessed him about anything, because the things he told me, like I would have never dreamed that he would have told me, honestly. Probably one of the toughest things for me is like when I think back through all the stuff, like there was signs right from the get-go. Like when we first, literally the very first week of the diet, so we literally kind of started like the beginning of December, and so we had talked at Nationals, which is the middle of November, and then we started in December. So I only literally worked with him for 3 months. He worked with another guy for 2 years before that, and then the guy 2 years before me he ended up working with when he died. But the very first week, like he calls me, he's like, listen, I'm throwing up. And I'm like, well, that's not, I said, you feel okay? And he's like, yeah. He goes, you know, I do that a lot. He goes, I've done it all my life. I got like a weird stomach, but he's like, I didn't know whether I should like replace the meal or not. And so I'm thinking like, wait a minute, like, what do you mean you did that your whole life? And he's like, well, I've thrown up my whole life. Like I had a weird stomach, like I literally throw up, like I threw up before every football game. I've thrown up like before every contest, like every contest diet I've ever had, I threw up. So I'm like, I said, listen, like don't, you know, let's just see how this plays out, because you may be sick, like you may have the stomach flu or something. So the week goes on and he seems fine, and then Thursday throws up again. So I'm like, okay, listen, this ain't normal. Like you don't just throw up, you're like literally 25 years old or something. I'm like, go to the urgent care. Like
this is a week, 2 weeks into your relationship of the 90 days.
This is a week into the relationship, right? And so he comes back and he's like, yeah, they think that I may have bronchitis and the drainage is it's making me throw up. And I'm like, well, how do you feel? And he goes, I feel great, but he goes, listen, I get bronchitis all the time. He goes, I've had pneumonia 10 times in my life. And I'm like, what? I go, you've had pneumonia 10 times in your life. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I literally like always get it. And he kind of blamed it and he was very open about this, so I have no problem talking, but he's like, yeah, I smoke weed from the time I was 12 years old. He goes, I probably smoke more weed than anybody. He goes, I kind of cough and I have drainage, and that's kind of what it kind of leads to. And I'm like, okay, I mean, it sounded...
Pneumonia from weed?
No, but he was saying he gets pneumonia, and I was trying to say the coughing. So the coughing, the drainage, and then he's like, you know, he's like restricted breathing, and then he ends up with like bronchitis and then pneumonia. And so I'm kind of thinking like, you know, I get the coughing, like the pneumonia thing sounds a little weird, like, I don't know. Let's see how you feel. I said, why don't you rest for a couple days? Let's see how you feel. Weekend goes by, it feels fine. A couple weeks go by, he's back to throwing up again. And I'm like, dude, this is not normal. Like, you shouldn't be throwing up. And he's like, Chad, I'm telling you, I throw up all the time. Like I literally, I've done it my entire life. And that's the one thing, thinking back, like, I'm like, you know, like where was that head? Like how in the hell, like where was that head, you know? And so we go through the process, like through the whole process, I can tell like something's off. Like his body's not really responding like I thought it would. It didn't, you know, and like, I don't know if people even believe this, but like based off of what he had been doing, we literally did half of that, what he had been doing. So a lot of this stuff, so
you're saying you're doing half of what he was doing?
Half of what he was doing. So my thinking was like, holy shit, like maybe like his body's not responding well. Like maybe it's not because we pulled back so far, right? But then all of a sudden his body kind of started to come around, and you know, and then he actually kind of started feeling better. Everything kind of seems like right on target. We go and we're literally planning on going into Pittsburgh to meet with Mannion, let him look at him, take a look at him, posing. Just we're sitting there, and he starts throwing up again, like with the stuff. And so I'm like, okay, like dude, like how, like this is not normal. You shouldn't be vomiting all the time. And he's like, Chad, listen, like this is just my life. Like this is what I do. Like I vomit, I have a weak stomach. Like this goes all the way back to football. Like it goes all the way back to football. And so I'm like, okay, so we go through the process. Through this whole process, I can tell like something's clearly off. His body didn't respond well. Like nothing's really responding well. So we start talking, and we start talking about like just personal things, like, you know, and so he had moved away from his hometown. He went to Boca to be part of the company that he was with and everything. And so we literally, and this is after the Arnold. So he ends up second. He, you know, he goes to New Zealand, which I literally didn't even want him to go to because I thought he was sick at the Arnold. I literally said, listen, don't go, but he had already like signed contracts. Like he was already committed. He's like, I have to go. I've already signed a contract. And I'm like, listen, just go to the doctor and, you know, get him. He's like, nah, I'm going to go. So we go there, and then of course he's super sick in Australia, almost passes out on stage. Like we literally, like literally 2 hours before that, we were literally talking on the phone. And I'm like, don't do the show. Like I don't want you to do the show. And he's like, I'm gonna take a nap and we'll see how I feel. 2 hours later he calls me back, man, I feel phenomenal. I feel great, you know. And I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, I feel phenomenal. Like I just needed a nap. I think it was a flight wore me out. Then of course he goes on stage, damn near passes out. So then he, you know, he comes back home. And so through this whole process, I'm like, listen, something's off. Like, I think that you're unhappy. Like, listen, I think you left your home. I think you moved to Boca. You don't know people there. You're staying in an apartment by yourself. Like you're doing all of this stuff that's like not making you happy. I'm like, you need to get out of there. Get completely out of there, go back home. And at the time, he didn't have a good relationship with his family, but he was trying to mend that. We don't even need to work together. I said, go back home, and his coach was in his hometown. I go back with him. I said, because I think that friendship stabilized you. Like, I think it stabilized you. I think you were happier within that environment. I think a lot of your friends and gym people were there. He was like, you know, like, I think that's what I'm going to do. And it was literally right after that they started posting up pictures, and I could tell instantly something was wrong, like instantly. And then I became like in this like tug of war with myself, like, okay, do I call up him and say, dude, what the hell are you guys doing? Like something looks off here. And then the last picture he posted, I'll never forget this, Dan Solomon called me and he's like, have you seen the picture of Dallas? And I'm like, I have. I said, he doesn't look good. And I said, he literally looks like he's getting ready to drop dead. It was literally right after that they started posting up pictures, and I could tell instantly something was wrong, like instantly. And then I became like in this like tug of war with myself, like, okay, do I call up him and say, dude, what the hell are you guys doing? Like something looks off here. And then the last picture he posted, I'll never forget this, Dan Solomon called me and he's like, have you seen the picture of Dallas? And I'm like, I have. I said, he doesn't look good. And I said, he literally looks like he's getting ready to drop dead. I said, and Dan Solomon says, dude, I just saw him and he looks like he's walking death. And I said, that's what he looks like in the picture. I said, he's gray. I said, his skin looks funky. Like
he's in the hospital? Or he's
they're just posting up progress pictures online. And and I'm like, I said, he doesn't look good. Like he just looked unhealthy. And 2 days later, he died. Like, and that's the story. Like, you know, I didn't, you know, like I wasn't training him during the time. I trained him for 3 months. I didn't train him for the next 4 months or whatever. From the time he died, I have no idea what they did. I have no idea what he was.
You know, again, in stories like this, you get a lot of different versions of it on what happens. But he was a guy that was a liked guy. That
he was
coming
one of
up.
The most liked guy in the sport.
That's
like, I'm telling you, like he was, if not the most liked guy. Like, I mean, I'm telling you, like you were never going to find anybody that had anything negative to say about him.
Let me ask you about it. There's an article online that says the supposed Dallas mccarver anabolic cycle from Chad Nichols, right? And all of the stuff here that it's got, you know, I mean, the list is
it's
a
not,
lot.
I can tell you, first of all, that's not, I can tell you, I've already seen it. It was sent to me. I can tell you exactly what it is, if you want me to tell you.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not his cycle. This is a drug list that him and his coach ordered. That's the list they ordered. That's it.
That's a drug list that they ordered?
That's a drug order list.
But that's not you?
This has nothing to do with me.
Okay. So
I can tell you that with a fact.
This is pre-you or
this is after me, I believe. This is either pre-me or after me, but this has nothing to do with me in Dallas at all. Like,
Chad, that's some
nothing.
Heavy, that's a lot of heavy
This is a ridiculous
stuff.
amount. But this supposedly, what I was told, is a shopping list for him and one other person. That's what I was told, and I was told that from literally the person they ordered it from. So it's a legitimate, like it's a legitimate guy that told me that. So
it's a legitimate guy that told you, but this part has nothing to do with you ordering with them. That's
this ain't got anything to do with
me.
Like this literally, like I can tell you by, like there's so much stuff on this because I believe this is the one, because I've seen two, but this is the one with EPO on it.
Yeah.
And it's weird because that drug right there, I can promise you, like he didn't use with me, but he asked me about that drug. And it's weird because I didn't even think anything about it, but we were at the Arnold and he said, listen, he goes, I've heard people use EPO. And I'm like, yeah, I go, listen, I know of maybe 3 people that could have benefited or has benefited from EPO. I said, very few people, because it's a drug that literally doesn't really play a factor with bodybuilders. There are some very rare instances that possibly. And he's like, and then he asked me this question, I'll never forget this. And this was before I ever seen this list. He asked me, well, how long do they stay on that? And I'm like, 5 weeks max. And he's like, really? He goes, have you ever heard of anybody staying on longer than that? And I'm like, yeah, cyclists. He goes, bodybuilders? And I'm like, no. And he goes, so nobody like 6 months, a year? And I'm like, I go, dude, I don't know.
He's asking you this.
He's asking me that question. And I said, no. I said, that would be friggin' idiotic. Like I said, that
you get a sense that he asked you because he had done it for 6 months, or you don't know?
I didn't have any idea.
Okay.
I didn't have any idea what he was asking me. But then when I saw this, then I saw the EPO on it. And that's when I was like, holy shit, like what was he asking about? Like, and then I had already seen this list, and it wasn't until after the list that somebody told me, like, well, you know what that list is? That's an order list, you know. And if you know anybody involved with this list, there's a couple things on the list that points right to who the list is. So
who it came from?
Yes.
Okay. And your world would know who that is?
My world would 100% know who that is. And they would 100% know that has nothing to do with me.
Okay. So let me ask you this. The reason why I'm going in this direction is the following. I'm a fan of the sport. At this point of the game, you know I'm a fan of the sport. I showed you a picture earlier what I looked like when I was 20 years old.
Which was amazing, by the way.
I mean,
it was crazy,
right? Yeah, I wanted to go in the world in the direction of being a bodybuilder. And in 1 minute, I'm like, no, I'm leaving it. So with the current state of where Mr. Olympia is, with no Joe Weider, there's not a Weider, right? There's not somebody that's selling it, pitching it, from the top. Right. And with the current social media conditions where something like this wouldn't be around 1994. Someone's not going to write an article like this and say, hey, look what you... Someone's not going to be online saying, hey, Chad, hey, that's not the world we're in today. Not today, 25 years ago, right? What do you foresee taking place with the future of Mr. Olympia today in bodybuilding? And what do you think needs to happen for it to become mainstream rather than a niche, small community sport of don't bring too much attention. A little bit is good, we can make money, but let's not bring a lot of attention to it.
I think the direction that we're headed right now is positive, like literally positive. And there's a couple things. Like the direction that the Olympia went last year. Now, people are going to rip the shit out of the Olympia last year because there wasn't like a defending champ. There wasn't big names in it. And so, you know, I honestly feel sorry for Brandon Curry a little bit because, you know, he was in a no-win situation. Like him, Bonac, Hottie, like, listen, any three of those guys could have won. And they all three are going to go through what kind of Brandon is going through a little bit right now. And they're all going to be like, well, of course he won because he didn't beat anyone. There was nobody in it. Bonac wins, he goes through the same thing. Like, they all do it. But at the end of the day, Brandon Curry earned the right to be Mr. Olympia. He showed up, he battled. Like, I personally don't think he should have won. Like, I thought Hottie should have won. Like, because
and
I
Hottie was so you thought Hottie should have won.
I loved Hottie's physique because I'm a guy that's big on conditioning. I like conditioning. I thought, to me, like, when you look at structure, muscularity, and conditioning in comparison to all three, I thought Hottie had more of that. But I also could see how Bonac could have won, and I can 100% see how Curry did win. So I thought it was that close. I thought it was literally, there just wasn't that one guy that just was like, oh shit, this guy, it's over type of thing. But the direction that the Olympia has gone, turning over to Dan Solomon, who everybody knows is a good friend of mine, but I know the direction he wants to take things. And if you look at all the stuff that he's doing right now, you're going to see big names in the show this year. So it's going to have heavy hitters in this.
Are you talking about Flex Lewis, or who are you talking about?
You got Flex Lewis in it.
Right.
We know that Big Rammy's probably going to be there. Who knows if Phil's going to be there? But like, there's going to be some major guys in this lineup. So whoever wins this, it's going to be a legitimate win. So that's a foregone conclusion. But the part that can take us into the next level is Athleticon. It can benefit across the board. Now, everybody's trying to act like, oh, Athleticon is going to hurt the Olympia. I completely disagree. I think Athleticon is going to benefit the Olympia because anything that has The Rock involved in it, and he has embraced this industry. He is a bodybuilding fan. He trains. He lives this type of sport, and he is bringing a different level of, you know, like everything that he can do, nobody's been able to do. Like, listen, what he could do for this sport, there literally hasn't been. Like Joe Weider and the things that they've done. Like, nobody will do what they did again because it was just a different time. Like, that for me was like the golden era because like he knew all the athletes and it was like a family. Like, it was a little bit different. It wasn't mainstream, even though they wanted it in the Olympics. It probably was just never going to get there. The Rock can make it mainstream. He can put it out there and say, look at what these guys do. Look at the hard work they do.
Can it take attention away from Mr. Olympia or no?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the Mr. Olympia is the Mr. Olympia, and I think that Athleticon could be huge. I think it could be monstrous.
To the point where you don't think Phil's going to hit the stage this year?
I think he's going to hit Athleticon.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I still think we could benefit because the ultimate goal potentially would be whoever wins the Olympia goes to Athleticon. Now, I think obviously, if Mr. Olympia then beats Phil Heath.
You realize how scary it is, what you just said?
It's scary because,
do you realize what you just
without
said?
a doubt.
Because then that means Athleticon becomes the...
Not necessarily. Just think if Phil Heath bypasses...
Arnold, Mr. Olympia.
Well, just think if, let's say that Phil Heath bypasses the... I'm just going to throw this out here.
Yeah.
So let's say Phil bypasses the Olympia and goes to Athleticon.
Yeah.
And let's say that Big Ram, he comes in and wins the Olympia.
Okay.
And decides he's going to go to Athleticon, and then he beats Phil at Athleticon. He just proved that the Mr. Olympia is still by far the top thing. Now, the flip side of that is if he wins the Olympia and goes and gets beat by Phil, then it becomes a different story.
Let me tell you the scarier part. Here's the scarier part. Say Phil goes and competes at Athleticon, he wins, he gets a contract with Under Armour, He gets a contract in the movies. He makes $9 million. Rami then goes and wins the next year. He gets a $4.5 million contract. Then there's a massive exodus. And you have to understand capitalism works that way.
No, I get that. I understand what you're saying.